I never liked the way autumn evenings crept in so suddenly, swallowing the last traces of daylight before most people even realized that night had arrived. That year, the air felt heavier than usual, the wind colder, and the world seemed quieter as the days counted down to Halloween. I was younger then, still taking on odd babysitting jobs, and I thought nothing of working on Halloween night itself, especially if it meant making a little extra money. Parents wanted to go out, parties were planned, and houses scattered across the town seemed to hum with anticipation of the season. For me, it was just another night to sit in someone else's home, watch over their child, and wait for the hours to pass. But this house was different. This street was different, and it would change the way I looked at babysitting forever. The family lived on a narrow road that locals quietly referred to as Hollow Street, though I never learned why. The houses there were older than most in the area, built with steep roofs and narrow windows, the kind that seemed designed to hide more than they revealed. When I first walked up the path to their front door, leaves scraped across the pavement in restless little spirals, and the trees lining the street looked like they were bending under a weight only they could feel. It was the kind of place that gave you the feeling you were being watched, even when no one was around. Inside, the house was warm but shadowed, as though the lights never reached the corners of the rooms. The parents gave me a brief tour before they left, showing me the living room, the kitchen, and the child's room upstairs. Everything seemed normal enough, though I could not help but notice the way the hallway upstairs stretched longer than it should have, lined with closed doors that I was told not to worry about. They explained that the rooms had not been used in years, that some belonged to relatives who no longer visited, and I forced myself to nod, though I already felt uneasy. The child was quiet, shy, and easy to manage. I set them up with a small Halloween-themed movie while I tried to relax in the living room. The old clock above the fireplace ticked louder than any clock I had ever heard before, and the sound began to settle into the silence between the house's creaks and groans. It was still early when the wind picked up outside, rattling the window panes, and I caught myself staring at the dark glass as though I expected to see something there. Nothing appeared, yet the longer I looked, the more I felt as though the street itself had emptied, as though every other house had gone still, waiting for something unseen. By the time the child went upstairs to bed, the air in the house felt colder. I followed the routine, checked the locks on the doors, and returned to the couch with a blanket draped over my shoulders. Hours passed slowly, the kind of slow where the ticking of the clock becomes unbearable, where every sigh of the house sounds deliberate, where you feel your body tightening with a sense of warning you cannot explain. I wanted to distract myself, but the television signal wavered with static, and the silence after I turned it off felt even worse. When I finally went to check on the child, the long hallway upstairs seemed darker than before, as though the light from a small lamp by the stairs had been pulled back. Each door along the hallway looked the same, closed tightly, except one that now stood slightly ajar when earlier I was certain it had been shut. I ignored it, convincing myself it was nothing, and quietly peeked into the child's room. They were asleep, breathing steadily, untouched by the strange weight that pressed into me. I closed the door gently, turned to leave, and felt the coldest draft brush the back of my neck. The stairway groaned beneath my feet as I descended, but before I reached the bottom, the sound of movement drifted from above. It was faint at first, like something brushing along the walls, and then it shifted into the unmistakable creak of another door opening. I froze halfway down, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles whitened. My heart thudded in my chest as the sound stopped, leaving only silence so deep it felt as though the entire house was holding its breath. I returned to the living room, too afraid to make noise, and sat there in the dim light, watching shadows gather in the corners. Midnight came, and with it, A change in the atmosphere so sudden that I felt it in my bones. The warmth drained from the air, and the sound of the clock faltered for a single beat before resuming. The house seemed to shift around me, its walls pressing closer, its silence growing heavier, and somewhere above, a door that should have been locked away moved again, slow and deliberate, as though someone unseen had just stepped into the hall. That was when I realized that Hollow Street lived up to its name, for the house was not just old. It was empty in a way that went beyond abandonment, and whatever lingered there had begun to notice me. I told myself not to go back upstairs, not to risk seeing whatever had made the sound, but the longer I sat in the living room, the more unbearable the silence became. The walls groaned now as though something pressed against them from the inside, the draft in the air growing colder until it seemed to seep through my skin and sink into my bones. I checked the locks again, every door bolted, every window latched, and yet none of it comforted me, because the danger was not outside. It was somewhere inside the house. The thought of the child upstairs kept clawing at me. I could not just sit there, waiting for morning, while those sounds came closer. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the steps sounding like a warning, each shadow along the hallway deepening into shapes that seemed to move when I blinked. The lamp at the stairs then flickered faintly, though there had been no storm and no reason for the power to falter. I forced myself forward, my breathing shallow, my eyes fixed on the child's door. When I reached it, I saw at once that it was open a fraction wider than I had left it. The air leaking from inside was freezing, so unnatural that I hesitated before touching the doorknob. Pushing it open, I found the bed empty. The blanket was folded back neatly as though the child had risen quietly and left of their own accord. My stomach dropped as I scanned the room, my mind scrambling for explanations that did not exist. No sound of footsteps, no whispered movement, just the faint scent of cold earth drifting in the air. Panic drove me into the hallway, but as I turned I realized the other doors, the ones that had been closed earlier, were now all standing slightly open, each one revealing nothing but thick darkness inside. The hallway looked impossibly long, stretching further than it had before, the perspective bending in a way that made me feel I would never reach the stairs if I tried. The sound of the clock downstairs ticked faintly, but it no longer felt like it belonged to this house. It was distant, disconnected, like a memory fading. I called out for the child instinctively, but my voice fell flat in the heavy air, as though swallowed before it could travel. Then came the sound of small footsteps, pattering faintly, but not from one place, from all the rooms at once, echoing in unison, too synchronized to be real. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, and from the far end of the hallway, a figure stepped forward. It was child-sized, but not the child I had been watching. Its limbs moved awkwardly, its head cocked at an angle that no living person could sustain, and its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly with a pale, hollow light. I could not move. My legs would not obey, and all I could do was stand as more shapes emerged from the open rooms, each one small, each one carrying the same broken posture, the same faint glow where their eyes should have been. They gathered silently, their steps in perfect rhythm, advancing down the hall toward me. I stumbled back into the child's room, desperate for some escape, but the window there showed only darkness, deeper than the night outside, as though the glass no longer opened to the street, but to some void that waited patiently. The shapes filled the doorway, and behind them, at the far end of the hall, I saw the child at last. They stood perfectly still, their face pale, their eyes empty, watching me with an expression I had never seen on them before. It was not fear, not confusion, but something closer to recognition, as though they understood what I could not, that I had been chosen simply for being there, that the house had decided it was time to claim me, as it had claimed others before. The lights in the house died all at once, plunging everything into a blackness so complete that I felt blind, though I could still hear the steady, measured footsteps surrounding me. The last thing I remember was the sensation of cold hands pressing against my arms, my face, my throat, dozens of them, each touch impossibly strong for something so small. Then silence fell again, absolute and eternal. When I woke, it was morning, sunlight spilling through the window as though nothing had happened. The child was back in bed, sleeping peacefully. The hallway outside normal again, all doors closed. The parents returned later, thanking me casually as though I had done my job without incident. I never spoke of what happened, never admitted how close I had come to losing myself in that house. But every Halloween since, I have dreamed of Hollow Street and woken to the sound of children's footsteps in my own hallway, fading only when the first light of dawn touches the floor. And I know, no matter how far I stay from that house, it has marked me. And one night, when I am least prepared, it will return for me. The first Halloween I spent in the countryside was not by choice, but by necessity. I had recently moved away from the city, chasing a quieter life and taking whatever work I could find until something permanent came along. Babysitting was not something I had much experience with, yet people in small towns trust quickly when they need help, and it did not take long before someone suggested my name to a family that lived far beyond the last streetlight, in a farmhouse surrounded by open fields. I remember the drive more vividly than I should. The two-lane road wound through endless rows of corn that rattled in the October wind, tall stalks bending as though they might lean into the car at any moment. The moon was nearly full, a pale orange disk hanging low above the horizon, and it cast just enough light to turn the fields into a restless ocean of movement. There were no other cars, no passing houses, only the sensation that I was being drawn further and further from everything familiar. The family had said the house was old but comfortable, that they rarely had visitors, and that the road would eventually end right at their property. They had not exaggerated. The farmhouse appeared like a shadow against the rolling landscape, its roof peaked sharply, its windows reflecting the harvest moon in a way that made them look like watching eyes. The porch sagged, the boards groaning under my weight as I climbed the steps, and the air smelled faintly of smoke from distant bonfires. They greeted me politely, giving me instructions for the night, and I tried to memorize the layout as they showed me through. The downstairs rooms were cramped but warm, the kitchen filled with the faint scent of spice and pumpkin, and the staircase wound steeply upward to a narrow hallway of bedrooms. The child I was to watch was already dressed in pajamas, quiet but friendly enough, their laughter soft when they told me about the scarecrows that stood out in the fields. When the parents left, the farmhouse seemed to exhale, its silence deeper than I expected, its walls creaking like an old body settling into the weight of night. I set the child in the living room with a small book until bedtime, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. No curtains covered them, and beyond the glass the corn swayed rhythmically in the wind, the stalks so high that they seemed to press against the house itself. I thought I saw shapes among them more than once, silhouettes that stood too still to be natural, but when I looked again they were gone, swallowed by the shifting rows. Later, after the child had gone upstairs to bed, I stepped outside briefly to breathe in the night air. The sound of the corn was overwhelming, rustling and whispering in waves, and I caught myself scanning the edge of the field where the scarecrows were propped. There were several of them, tall and crude, their arms outstretched against wooden frames, their heads nothing more than sacks stuffed with straw. They stood in a line that stretched beyond sight, each one staring blankly toward the house. It unsettled me in a way I could not explain. So I hurried back inside and locked the door behind me. The farmhouse at night carried sounds of its own. The steady hum of wind through the walls, the occasional rattle of the roof, the shifting groan of wood under stress. Hours passed slowly, my attention caught between the ticking of the clock on the wall and the whispering waves of corn just outside. I tried reading, tried distracting myself, but a prickling sense of unease settled over me that I could not shake. It was as though the house knew I was not part of it, as though it was holding me at arm's length while waiting for something else to arrive. It was nearing midnight when the first real disturbance came. I was halfway up the stairs, checking on the child, when I heard the faint scrape of something against the window in the hallway. It was not the usual tapping of branches or the shifting of the house. It was deliberate, slow, dragging downward. I froze, my hand gripping the banister, my eyes drawn to the dark glass at the end of the hall. Nothing was there, not at first, but when the moon broke free from a cloud, I saw the outline of a figure standing just beyond the glass, its shape tall and crooked, its arms bent at an angle that suggested something broken. I blinked, and it was gone, as though it had never been there at all. The hallway was empty, silent except for my own breathing. I pushed on, checked the child's room, found them sleeping soundly, and pulled the door closed. But when I turned back, the window at the end of the hallway stood open, its latch undone though I had locked every window earlier. The cold night air poured in, carrying with it the scent of earth and dry husks, and somewhere beyond the fields, the wind shifted in a way that almost resembled voices. I closed the window quickly, trying to steady my shaking hands, but when I glanced outside, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The line of scarecrows in the field had changed. There were more of them now, closer than before, their crooked bodies leaning just slightly in the moonlight, their heads all tilted in the same unnatural direction, toward the house. And though the night was silent, I could have sworn I heard the rustle of footsteps moving through the corn, circling, waiting, as if the harvest itself had begun to watch me. I shut the curtains on that window, though it did little to calm me. The image of those scarecrows leaning closer to the farmhouse clung to me like a splinter in the mind, refusing to be shaken loose. Every few minutes I would glance toward the glass, expecting the fabric to twitch, expecting some darker outline to appear against it. The farmhouse felt smaller by the hour, as though the walls had been drawn tight around me, pressing in, while the outside world grew vast, endless, and alive with things I could not see clearly. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my duty, checking locks again, pacing the downstairs, peeking in once more on the sleeping child. But no matter how carefully I listened, the sound of movement returned. At first it was faint, like the shifting of the wind through dry stalks, but soon it became unmistakably patterned, deliberate, like several sets of footsteps weaving in and out of the corn. The rhythm was wrong for animals, too heavy, too purposeful. Sometime after midnight, I realized the sounds were closer, not out in the depths of the field, but at the very edge where the scarecrows stood. I could hear the uneven scrape of weight pressing into dirt, then pausing, then resuming, as though figures were circling slowly, drawing nearer with each pass. My throat went dry. I shut every curtain, turned off every lamp, but that only made the farmhouse feel more exposed, the windows like weak shields against a night that wanted in. I forced myself back upstairs, clinging to the idea that the child must never wake and see any of this. The hallway stretched narrow before me, the wooden floor groaning faintly beneath my steps. At the far end, the window I had latched shut once already now stood open again, the curtain lifting gently in the cold wind. I stopped, my chest tight, knowing that I had locked it properly, knowing that I could no longer explain what was happening as anything ordinary. I approached slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and as I leaned to slam it shut, I froze. The field beyond was not empty. A figure stood directly at the edge of the corn, facing the farmhouse, its head a burlap sack, its shoulders crooked, its frame stuffed with straw that bristled in the wind. For a moment I thought it was only one of the scarecrows, but then it moved, its head tilting sharply upward, its sack face lifting until I felt it looking directly at me. I stumbled backward, slammed the window closed, locked it again, and ran down the hallway in panic. Yet even as I did, I realized that the sound of rustling was no longer outside. It was above me. The ceiling groaned as though weights shifted across it, straw and dirt drifting faintly from the cracks between the beams. Something was on the roof. The child stirred in their room then, a soft creak of the bed frame carrying through the door, and I felt terror grip me harder than ever. I rushed in, found them sitting upright, their eyes still half dreaming, their face pale in the glow of the moonlight. Before I could comfort them, before I could even speak, the window of their room rattled violently, the glass vibrating as if struck by unseen hands. I pulled the child close, held them tight, and the rattling stopped, but only to be replaced by a scratching, slow and steady, dragging across the wood of the house. The sound circled the room, around the window frame, across the siding, upward toward the roof. It was as though the scarecrows had left their posts in the field, one by one, and now clung to the house itself, climbing, dragging, surrounding us. The child buried their face against me, trembling, and I could not tell them it would be all right, because I knew it would not. Minutes passed like hours, the scratching and dragging never ceasing, shifting from one wall to the next, until I no longer knew how many there were. At last, the noise fell silent. I thought perhaps it had ended, but then the air grew heavy, the temperature dropping so sharply that my breath clouded in the dark. From the hallway outside came the unmistakable sound of straw brushing against wood, followed by the creak of footsteps that did not belong to human feet. I could not move. The child clung to me as the steps drew closer, slow, deliberate, pausing outside the bedroom door. The knob turned once, rattled, then fell still. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with impossible force, the door buckled inward, though it did not break. The wood groaned, the hinges strained, and I knew whatever pressed from the other side could have entered if it wished, but it did not. It lingered, testing, waiting, before retreating again. By the time morning light seeped through the curtains, the house was quiet. The fields outside looked normal, the scarecrows back in their line, unmoved. The child remembered nothing, slipping back into sleep easily as though the night had never occurred. When the parents returned, cheerful and unaware, I said nothing, though I noticed that they did not look surprised by how pale I was, how shaken. It was as though they expected it, as though others had gone through the same. I never returned to that farmhouse, never drove that road again. But on certain autumn nights, when the harvest moon hangs low and orange, I hear the rustle of corn in the wind, and I know that the scarecrows are not watching the fields at all. They are watching the houses that stand too close to them, waiting patiently for the night when the watchers finally step inside. Every Halloween carried its own atmosphere, but Lantern Drive was something different altogether. The street had become almost legendary in that part of town. Parents drove their kids there from miles away, certain that no other neighborhood could match the spectacle. Every porch was draped with cobwebs, every tree strung with orange and purple lights, and every front yard staged with elaborate decorations, graveyards, animatronics, even fog machines that spilled eerie mist onto the sidewalks. As a teenager, I had walked that street with friends, weaving through the crowds and filling bags with candy until they nearly burst. I had always admired it from the outside, but I had never thought I would be inside one of those houses, looking out. That year, it happened almost by chance. A family needed a babysitter, someone willing to watch their little one while they went to a Halloween gathering just down the road. I agreed without hesitation. It felt like the safest job I could imagine. Suburban, festive, and right in the middle of the busiest street in town. The kind of place where nothing bad could possibly happen because there were always too many people around. When I arrived, the evening was already in full swing. Children in masks and capes darted across lawns. Parents stood chatting by mailboxes, and every few seconds the sharp knock of trick or treat rang down the block. The house itself stood near the far end of the cul-de-sac, older than its neighbors but well kept, its bay window glowing with warm light, and its porch lined with carefully carved pumpkins. Ivy climbed the brickwork near the garage, and a scarecrow slumped against the fence, its straw hat tilted forward as if in drowsy watch. Inside, the home was comfortable, filled with the scent of cinnamon candles and the faint sound of music playing from a speaker tucked away in the kitchen. The parents moved quickly, already dressed for their party, explaining bedtime routines and pointing out the night light in the child's room before slipping into the night with hurried thanks. That left me standing in a warm, well-lit living room, the bay window framing the endless flow of trick-or-treaters. It all felt so normal, almost cheerful, that I wondered if the hours ahead might even be enjoyable. The child was quiet and easy, too young for the chaos outside, and soon after being tucked into bed, the house grew still. I settled on the couch with a blanket, the television on low, though I kept finding myself drawn to the window. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with life. Costumes of every kind paraded past, ghosts, witches, superheroes, while parents trailed behind carrying flashlights that bobbed through the dark. The jack-o'-lanterns flickered merrily, their carved faces grinning in the steady stream of night. As the hours crept forward, I noticed a change. It was subtle at first, the laughter thinning, the groups of children dwindling. By 9 o'clock, the sidewalks were nearly empty, and by 10, the parade of costumes had stopped altogether. Porch lights that had glowed so brightly began to wink out one by one, until only a handful remained scattered along the cul-de-sac. Without the noise of the crowds, the silence felt heavier than it should have, the kind of silence that pressed close against the windows. I checked on the child again, reassured by the steady rise and fall of their small frame and sleep, then drifted back to the living room. The pumpkins on the porch caught my attention next. Their lights flickered strangely, not like a candle guttering in the wind, but in quick, sharp pulses, dimming all at once before flaring back in unison. The air outside was calm. No breeze stirred the trees, no rustle touched the leaves on the lawn, yet the pumpkins seemed to breathe as though alive. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a trick of the wax or a flaw in the candles, but soon after I heard it, the sound of footsteps crunching along the driveway. Slow, heavy, measured. I expected a knock at the door, but none came. When I looked out, the street appeared empty, quiet beneath the faint orange glow of the last street lamp at the cul-de-sac's end. Only the carved pumpkins stared back at me, their faces twisted in sharp smiles that seemed darker than before. The next hour dragged by. The neighborhood had gone completely dark now. Every porch light extinguished, every curtain drawn. The houses that had been alive with decoration and sound were reduced to silent shells. The only illumination came from the dim glow of the jack-o'-lanterns, and even those wavered as though on the verge of going out for good. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the hallway clock became deafening in their isolation. I paced the living room, checked the locks, tried to distract myself with television, But every so often, I heard movement again, footsteps and leaves, the faint scrape of something brushing against the siding, always just outside the range of sight. When I finally gathered the nerve to look out the bay window again, my chest tightened. A figure stood in the cul-de-sac, still silent, unmoving beneath the street lamp. Too far to make out details, only the shape of a tall body and the tilt of a head angled toward the house. They did not move, did not approach, did not turn away, only watched. I forced myself to step back from the window, but curiosity dragged me to it again minutes later. The figure was closer now, at the edge of the driveway. I had not seen it move, had not blinked long enough to miss its steps, but somehow it had crossed half the distance without sound. Another glance, and it was closer still, at the sidewalk now, the faint halo of the street lamp gone, leaving only the silhouette against the blackness. By the time I looked again, I could no longer see the figure at all, and that was somehow worse than if it had still been there. The pumpkins had gone out completely, their carved grins swallowed by darkness. The neighborhood outside was silent, every house dark, every porch cold. Lantern Drive, the street that had been so alive hours before, looked abandoned, as though I was the last one left awake. I checked the doors again, tested each lock with shaking hands, but the sense of safety had already dissolved. Upstairs, the faint glow of the child's nightlight flickered, and in the pit of my stomach I knew the truth. The figure had not vanished. It had simply crossed the last boundary. It was not outside anymore. It was in the house. The air inside the house grew different after that realization. The warmth I had felt earlier, the cinnamon-scented comfort, the safe glow of lamps, was gone. Every corner seemed too deep, every shadow too long. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was listening, waiting, as if the house itself had taken in a breath and was holding it. I stayed in the living room at first, frozen near the couch, my ears straining for any sound that would prove or disprove what I had convinced myself of. At times, I thought I could hear it. The soft wave of foot on carpet, the faint creak of stairs settling beneath the slow shift of weight. Other times, I told myself it was nothing, that houses made noises, that fear could invent footsteps where there were none. Yet, no matter how tightly I clung to those excuses, my heart knew better. The figure I had seen had not vanished into thin air. It had crossed the line between outside and in, and it was only a matter of where it stood now. I forced myself to move, my steps careful, deliberate, as I checked the front door, then the back, then the windows along the first floor. Every lock was tight, every latch secure, but the sense of safety didn't return. Locks meant nothing if the thing was already inside. And besides, I hadn't heard a door open at all. That detail disturbed me more than anything. The silence had never been broken. No hinges, no rattles, no entry that I could detect. When I passed the base of the staircase, I froze. The nightlight upstairs glowed faintly, casting a soft amber spill through the child's doorway. Only now it flickered, stuttering as if caught between failing and burning steady. I stood in the dark below, watching that glow stutter and pulse, and with each flicker, a new thought sank deeper into my chest. Someone was up there, standing in the hall, blocking and unblocking that light. The climb up the stairs stretched out unbearably, every step a war against the part of my mind screaming to turn back. The wooden banister felt damp beneath my hand, slick though there was no moisture in the air. Halfway up, the faint sound came again, like breathing. Not steady, not calm, but ragged, as though lungs struggled to draw air quietly. I held my breath to listen, but the sound stopped when I did, resuming faintly when I moved again. At the top, I glanced down the hall. The child's door was ajar, the night light inside casting its trembling glow across the floorboards. Nothing stirred, no shadow passed, yet I could not shake the feeling of being watched from just beyond that frame. I pushed the door wider, my hands trembling, expecting something to lunge forward. The child lay still, tucked beneath blankets, their small chest rising and falling in sleep. Relief washed through me, but it was brief, thin, gone as soon as my gaze shifted toward the corner of the room. That was where I saw it, or rather, failed to see it. The darkness that was thicker than the rest, a kind of swallowing absence, too dense to be explained by the lamp's weak light. The air felt colder there, and though my eyes tried to make sense of shapes, none held. Still, the certainty remained. Something stood there, patient and silent, waiting. I backed away, pulling the door closed until only a crack remained, telling myself I was shielding the child, protecting their sleep. But deep down, I knew I was shutting myself out of that room because I could not bear to share it with whatever crouched in that shadow. The hallway behind me felt longer than it had before. The walls stretched, the ceiling higher. The bathroom door at the far end was ajar, and though I had seen it closed earlier, I told myself maybe I'd forgotten. A faint drip of water echoed from within, though when I checked before, the sink had been dry. I did not dare move closer. My body pulled me back toward the stairs, down to the living room, to light and television and anything that felt normal. By the time I reached the first floor, the house no longer felt like it belonged to people. It had become something else, a hollow shell that contained me only as prey. The windows no longer reflected anything inside. When I glanced at them, they showed only the dark street beyond, blank and endless, as if Lantern Drive itself had been erased. Not a single house remained lit. Not a single car passed. The world outside the glass had vanished into a stage for the figure I had seen earlier. And then I saw it again. It stood at the far end of the hall, where the front door met the wall, half-shrouded in the dim light. Tall, silent, its head cocked to one side, too far to be natural. I blinked, and it was closer, halfway down the hall. I had not heard a single step. I blinked again, and it was closer still, its outline sharper, though the details of its face refused to form, as though shadow itself clung where features should be. Panic finally broke through the paralysis. I turned, rushing for the kitchen, fumbling at the back door, but every lock jammed beneath my hands, bolts and latches that had worked perfectly minutes before refusing to budge now. Behind me, the air shifted, the pressure of a presence drawing nearer, the sound of breathing no longer faint, but right at my shoulder. I spun, ready to face it, to see what I had been fearing all night. But there was nothing in front of me, only the yawning dark of the kitchen and the faint glow of the refrigerator light. For a heartbeat, I thought I had imagined everything, that terror had made me hallucinate the figure. And then I saw it again, not in the room, in the reflection of the glass oven door. Its face, or what should have been a face, loomed inches from my own reflection, a void where eyes and mouth should be, shifting, pulsing as though it were struggling to form into something I could recognize. My breath fogged the glass, and in that blur, the figure leaned closer, the void of its head swallowing the reflection whole. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, rushing toward the stairs with no thought but to reach the child's room again. Yet, as soon as I placed my foot on the first step, the sound returned. Not footsteps, not breathing, laughter, faint, rasping, joyless, coming from every corner at once. When the parents returned hours later, they found the house silent, the lamp still burning, the child asleep in bed untouched. They never mentioned me again, and I was never seen leaving that house. Lantern Drive has never been the same either. Every year since, one house at the end of the cul-de-sac remains dark on Halloween night, its porch bare, its pumpkins unlit, its windows closed tight against the street. No one answers the door there anymore. No one claims to live inside.